There's a specific kind of silence that only exists 2 stories underground. It's not peaceful, it's heavy. It presses against your eardrums like deep water, interrupted only by the rhythmic, insect-like buzzing of the overhead fluorescence. I took the graveyard shift at the university's Special Collections Archive, for the same reason anyone takes a job that ruins their sleep schedule and social life. The pay was $18 an hour, and I was drowning in tuition fees. My job was supposed to be simple. Sit at the front desk of the climate-controlled basement, digitize boring catalog cards from the 1,980 seconds, and make sure the humidity sensors didn't spike. It was boring, sterile work. At least, it was until last night. The basement, officially level B2, is essentially a concrete bunker. It smells of recycled air, old dust, and that sharp, acidic tang of decaying paper. The main room is lined with rows of gray metal shelving, filled with mundane things: alumni donations, old yearbooks, thesis papers from the 1,950 seconds. But in the far back corner, past the microfiche readers that haven't been touched since 2004, stands the Holloway bequest. It doesn't look like the rest of the library. It's a section walled off by a floor-to-ceiling chain-link cage, like an evidence locker in a police station. Inside, the shelves aren't metal. They're dark, heavy mahogany that looks out of place against the concrete floor. I'd been working there for 3 months, and I'd never seen the cage open. My supervisor, Mark, a guy in his late 40s with perpetual bags under his eyes and fingers stained yellow from nicotine, told me on my first day that we didn't have clearance. "Dean's eyes only," he'd said, tapping the heavy padlock on the gate. "Don't even look at it too long. It gives you a headache." I thought he was joking. But last night, October 24th, the vibe in B2 was wrong from the moment I swiped my keycard. Usually, Mark is slouched in his chair watching Netflix on his phone when I relieve him at 10 p.m. Last night, he was pacing. He had his coat on, his keys already in his hand. He looked pale, his skin slick, with a sheen of cold sweat despite the room being a constant 68 degrees. "You're early," he snapped, though I was exactly on time. It was 9:58 p.m. "Just eager to scan some index cards, Mark," I said, dropping my backpack. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." He didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just shoved a heavy brass keyring into my hand, a set of keys I'd never held before. "I have to go," he said, his voice tight. "Family emergency. My daughter. I have to go." "Okay, sure," I said, confused. Mark didn't have a daughter. He told me explicitly he was divorced and childless during our orientation chat. "Do you need me to call security to log you out?" "No!" he shouted it, the sound echoing sharply off the concrete walls. He flinched at his own volume. I need you to do the inventory." The dean sent an email. "The Holloway bequest. Just count them. Don't read them. Just count the volumes and log the number." He was already moving toward the elevator, walking with a strange, jerky gait, like his legs were numb. "Mark?" I called out. He stopped at the elevator doors, but didn't turn around. "If the phone rings," he whispered, "don't answer it." The elevator dinged. He stepped in, and the door slid shut, leaving me alone in the buzzing silence of B2. I looked down at the keys in my hand. One of them was old iron and looked like it belonged to a dungeon door. I looked across the room at the cage in the shadows. For the first time in 3 months, the darkness behind that chain link fence didn't look empty. It looked like it was waiting. I stared at the elevator doors for a long time after Mark left. The floor indicator numbers didn't change. It was as if he hadn't gone up to the ground floor, but just vanished somewhere in the shaft between B2 and the lobby. I shook it off. "Get a grip," I told myself. "It's just a library." I walked back to the desk and grabbed the inventory scanner. Though looking at the ancient iron key in my hand, I doubted the books inside the Holloway bequest had barcodes. The walk from the main desk to the cage is only about 30 feet, but the acoustics in the basement made my footsteps sound like gunshots. Clack, clack, clack. When I stopped in front of the chain link fence, the silence rushed back in to fill the space, louder than before. Up close, the cage smelled different. The sterile library smell of dust and floor wax stopped abruptly at the mesh. Drifting out from the darkness behind the gate was something older. It smelled like wet wool and copper, like a handful of pennies you've held in a sweaty palm for too long. I slid the heavy iron key into the padlock. It was stiff, resisting the turn, grinding metal against metal until crack. The sound echoed violently around the concrete room, making me jump. "Hello?" I called out, feeling stupid immediately after. Who was I expecting? The ghost of Christmas past? I pulled the chain loose and swung the gate open. It didn't squeak. It swung silently on well-oiled hinges, which was somehow more unsettling than a rusty scream. I stepped across the threshold. Instantly, the air changed. It wasn't a gradual cooling. It was like stepping into a walk-in freezer. The hair on my arms stood up, and I felt my skin tighten. I checked the thermostat on the wall outside, still reading 68 degrees Fahrenheit. But inside the cage, I could see a faint wisp of white mist when I exhaled. It had to be 40 degrees in here. I shivered and rubbed my arms, walking toward the first shelf. The mahogany wood was dark, almost black, and seemed to absorb the light from the fluorescent tubes overhead rather than reflect it. There were hundreds of them, identical books. They were bound in deep crimson leather, the texture rough and pebbled. No dust jackets, no titles, no author names. I reached out to touch the spine of the nearest one. The leather felt weirdly soft, slightly oily, warm to the touch despite the freezing air in the room. I pulled my hand back instinctively, wiping it on my jeans. I squinted at the spine. There was text embossed there in gold leaf, but it wasn't a call number. It wasn't a title like History of the Occult or Biology 101. It was a date. February 14, 1985. I looked at the next one. February 15, 1985. And the next, February 18, 1985. I moved down the row, my flashlight beam dancing over the gold numbers. They were chronological, but they weren't publication dates. The leather on the 1985 books looked exactly as aged as the ones further down the shelf labeled 1920. "Okay," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. "It's just a chronological record of something. I needed to do the count. That was the job." I started at the top left shelf. 1, 2, 3. I counted for 20 minutes. The cold was seeping into my bones, making my fingers stiff. I reached the final shelf in the back corner. I did the math in my head. There were exactly 666 books. I stood there, staring at the number in my notebook. On 666. A cliché. A bad joke. Mark was probably upstairs laughing with the security guards, watching me on the CCTV. "Very funny, Mark," I said loud enough for the camera in the corner to pick up. But the camera wasn't moving. The red recording light wasn't blinking. It was dead. I looked back at the shelf in front of me. I wanted to leave. I wanted to lock the gate and go back to my desk. But my eyes caught a date on the spine of a book near my eye level. September 12, 2001. My stomach dropped. That was a specific date for me. I reached out, my hand shaking, and pulled the book off the shelf. It was heavy. I opened the cover. There was no title page, just a name, handwritten in elegant, flowing fountain pen ink right in the center of the first page. Emily Vanessa Thorne. I froze. I knew that name. Everyone on campus knew that name. Emily Thorne was the junior who had vanished from the Fine Arts building 3 years ago. They never found her body. I stared at the page. The crimson text, like blood freshly flowing from an open wound. The ink was still wet, glistening under the trembling flashlight beam in my hand. 22:05. Mark lied to the new employee about his daughter. He doesn't have a daughter. He just wanted to escape the cold that was clinging to the back of his neck. He thought that leaving the building would break the curse. He was wrong. My throat tightened, dry as if I had swallowed ash. I skimmed down, skipping over the descriptions of Mark's fear as he drove into the night. My eyes stopped at the last line. 23:42. At the sharp turn on Route 9, near the old quarry, the steering shaft of the silver 2014 Honda Civic will snap. Mark will hit the brakes, but the brake lines have been severed, not by human hands. The car will plunge through the guardrail. 23:43. Mark dies. I flinched, dropping the book as if it had just burned my hand. I frantically looked at the Casio watch on my wrist. 23:45. 3 minutes had passed since the time of death. "Impossible," I whispered, my voice cracking in the deadly silent space. "It's just a coincidence, or a twisted prank." but my hand automatically fumbled into my pocket, pulling out my phone. There was no cell signal in basement B2, but I could still catch the university Wi-Fi. My trembling fingers opened the police scanner app, the thing I used to listen to for fun during boring night shifts. I turned up the volume. The static of radio waves rang out, tearing through the stifling silence of the room. Rescue team en route to Route 9, confirming a silver Civic plunged into the quarry. Initial reports indicate no signs of life. Repeating. Driver deceased at the scene. The phone slipped from my hand, falling to the concrete floor. A chill ran down my spine. Not from the cold of the room, but from the brutal truth crashing down. The book didn't predict the future. It wrote the future. Mark was dead, correct in every detail. Correct to the minute. I backed away, my back slamming into the bookshelf behind me. Hundreds of crimson leather books vibrated, as if they were mocking me. The stench of copper and moldy paper hit my nose, making me nauseous. If Mark's book is here, and Emily Thorne's book is also here, then my book must be here too. I was born on the 12th of May, 2003. That thought invaded my mind, sweeping away all other fears. I didn't care about Mark anymore. I didn't care about Emily. Survival instinct rose powerfully. I needed to know. I needed to see what my last page said. I rushed frantically along the shelves, the flashlight beam sweeping across the rows of gold numbers. 1,998, 2,000, 2002. Here it is. I breathed out, my breath turning to white mist in front of me. 2003. I searched for the date. January 10, March 14. My hand stopped at a book wedged between two others. Its spine looked a bit newer, the crimson leather not as worn as the ones beside it. May 12, 2003. My heart beat so hard I could hear the thumping in my ears, drowning out the hum of the fluorescent lights. I pulled the book out. It was heavy, as if I were holding my own soul in my hands. I opened the first page. My name, written in perfect, curling black ink. I didn't dare read the first pages. I didn't want to read about my high school graduation or the first time I fell in love. I gripped the edge of the paper, flipping straight to the last page. The page was blank. I sighed in relief, a dry laugh escaping my throat. Not finished. It's not finished. But then, right before my eyes, the paper began to bleed. A red spot appeared in the center of the white page, then spread, forming scrawled, wet characters. A strong stench of rot rose from the book. The words appeared, one by one, as if an invisible hand were writing at terrible speed. 3:30 a.m. He stands in the iron cage, reading the book about his own death. He thinks that knowing beforehand will help him escape. But he forgot one thing. The library does not allow overdue books. I looked at the clock. 3:28 a.m. The text continued to appear, red ink running down the margins. 3:33 a.m. The lights in the basement will go out. The iron cage door will automatically lock, and the librarian will come to collect the dead. My eyes were glued to the flashing numbers on my wristwatch. 3 hours, 30 minutes, and 15 seconds. Less than 3 minutes left. The paralyzing horror shattered, giving way to frantic survival instincts. I threw the book onto the cold concrete floor. It hit the ground with a wet splat, like a slab of raw meat hitting a cutting board, not paper hitting stone. Blood splashed from the pages, splattering onto the leg of my jeans. "Run!" I screamed at myself. "Run now!" I spun around, lunging toward the iron cage door. The distance was only about 10 meters. Normally, it would take me 2 seconds to cross. But as soon as I took the first step, the air in the cage changed. It wasn't cold anymore. It became thick. It felt like the surrounding space had suddenly turned into liquid jelly. Every step became heavy, as if I were wading upstream through a waist-deep swamp. My lungs burned. I tried to inhale, but the air tasted strongly of rust, and the stench of formalin made me want to vomit. 3 hours, 31 minutes, and 45 seconds. I could see the iron door slightly ajar. The light from the desk area outside was still bright, safe, and normal. Just reach it. Just step over that damn threshold. I braced myself, pouring every ounce of strength into my trembling legs. I reached out. 5 meters, 3 meters, 1 meter. My fingertips just brushed the cold edge of the door frame, when an invisible force violently yanked the chain link door. Slam. The sound of metal crashing rang out harshly, vibrating my eardrums. The door slammed right in front of my nose, the wind from the impact hitting my face with icy cold. No, no! I threw myself at the bars, hands pounding frantically on the electronic lock panel nearby. Beep, beep, beep. No green light, no clicking of the latch opening. The small screen on the lock was pitch black. It was dead. Or someone had cut the power from the outside. I grabbed the bars, shaking them in desperation. Is anyone there? Help me! Please! Only the echo returned from the emotionless concrete walls. I looked down at the watch. 3 hours, 32 minutes, and 55 seconds. The last 5 seconds passed like torture. 5, 4, 3. I heard the buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead screeching like a dying insect. 2, 1. 3 hours, 33 minutes. A dry snap rang out from the fuse box in the distance. The row of fluorescent lights flickered, one sickly white turning to stained yellow, then died out. Darkness didn't just fall. It crashed down, heavy and suffocating, swallowing me into its belly. I was completely blind. The only light remaining was the faint glow of the luminous watch face on my wrist, and the tiny red dot from the fire alarm far away, looking like the eye of a stalking beast. And then, in that thick darkness, I heard it. Swish, swish. The sound came from the deepest corner of the archive, where the oldest books were kept. The sound of dry paper rubbing together. The sound of leather covers shifting. It is coming. I pressed my back tight against the cold iron mesh, the chill seeping through my shirt, numbing my flesh. But that cold was nothing compared to the sound that was approaching. It wasn't footsteps. There was no sound of shoes tapping on the floor. It was a slithering sound. It sounded like thousands of dry sheets of paper rubbing together, sliding across the concrete floor, heading toward me. Swish, screech, swish. A new scent rushed up, overpowering even the smell of fresh blood from before. The smell of old, acrid India ink, mixed with the damp mold of freshly dug graves. I held my breath, hands gripping the bars behind me tightly, as if wanting to bend them to escape. My eyes opened as wide as possible, but saw nothing but a hopeless black. Suddenly, the noise stopped. Right in front of me, in the thick darkness, I could feel the thing standing less than a hand's span away from me. The air around it was so cold that my eyelashes began to freeze and stick together. Then, a voice rang out. It didn't resemble a human voice produced by vocal cords. It sounded like paper being torn slowly, dry and sharp. Time is up. Its breath blew into my face, no warmth, just a gust of rotting dust, carrying the taste of ash. A hand or something like a hand, but rough like bark, brushed my cheek. The sensation was sharp like a paper cut, leaving a burning trail. In extreme panic, my brain stopped logical thinking. My hand fumbled unconsciously into my right jeans pocket. Fingers touched a cold, smooth metal surface. The Zippo lighter. I bought it at a thrift store last year, just to play with when my hands were bored, or to sneak a smoke after work. I never thought it would be the only thing standing between me and death. I pulled it out, my trembling hand almost dropping it to the floor. My thumb slid on the sweat-soaked flint wheel. Click. First time. No fire. The thing hissed, an ear-splitting sound like metal scratching a blackboard. It knew what I was planning. Click. Sparks flew. Then an orange-yellow flame roared to life, tearing through the night, and I saw it. I screamed, backing up and banging my head against the bars. It had no face. It was a looming, twisted figure, formed from thousands of crumpled pages, stuck together with a thick black liquid ink or necrotic black blood. Where eyes should be were just two deep, hollow sockets, leaking streams of pitch-black ink flowing down into a gaping mouth, jagged with sharp paper scraps for teeth. It reached out a long, elongated arm, ragged with razor-sharp paper edges toward my throat. "No!" I roared, not a scream for help, but the roar of a beast cornered. I couldn't fight it. Flesh and blood couldn't fight this monstrosity. But I remembered the book recording my death. It was lying at my feet, where I had thrown it. The book predicted I would die in darkness. It predicted the librarian would come, but it didn't predict I would burn the library. I dove to the floor, grabbing the red leather book still lying open, the bloody text still wet on the white page. The librarian shrieked a sound of tearing fabric and lunged. I thrust the flame into the bloody page. The flame from the Zippo licked at the blood-soaked page. It didn't catch fire like normal paper. It flared up violently with a piercing scream. Not the sizzle of burning matter, but the agonized scream of a human being burned alive. The blood on the page boiled, acting like gasoline, turning the flame a sickly crimson, illuminating the hideous angles of the room. The librarian recoiled as if it had just been splashed with acid. Its body made of scrap paper twisted and crumpled violently. The pages forming its eyeless face began to char at the edges, curling up, emitting the stench of animal glue and rotting history. It roared a chaotic, ear-splitting sound of thousands of book pages being torn at once. It no longer cared about me. It was trying to extinguish the invisible fire, consuming the very essence of its connection to the library. I threw the screaming book toward the nearest bookshelf. The fire spread with supernatural speed. It didn't burn slowly. It jumped from volume to volume like an infectious disease. In seconds, a whole wall of crimson books erupted, turning the cold room into a blazing crematorium. The books writhed on the shelves, leather covers cracking like heated flesh, exposing the pages inside burning to ash. The terrible heat hit, drying the cold sweat on my forehead, making the air stifling and hard to breathe. Ring! Ring! The fire alarm rang out deafeningly, mingling with the screams of the books. I heard the overhead sprinkler system activate with a loud hiss. But what sprayed down wasn't water. A black, thick liquid, viscous like waste oil mixed with printer ink, poured down from the nozzles. It covered everything. Me, the fire, the writhing librarian. When the liquid hit the fire, it didn't extinguish it, but rose in columns of thick black smoke, smelling of toxic chemicals that burned my lungs. I coughed violently, eyes stinging, vision obscured by the pitch-black smoke screen. In the chaos of fire, toxic smoke, and black ink rain, I heard another sound, the dry click-clack from the iron cage door. The electrical system had shorted. The magnetic lock released. I didn't think. Covering my nose with an ink-stained sleeve, I plunged through the black smoke, kicking the mesh door hard. It swung open. I tumbled onto the concrete floor outside the cage area, sliding on the layer of sticky black ink spilling out from inside. I didn't dare look back. I crawled on all fours toward the dim light of the emergency stairwell, leaving behind the frantic screaming of the fire and the paper creature burning to death in its own grave. I woke up in the emergency room with an oxygen mask over my face and the steady beep of the heart monitor. The doctor said I was found lying unconscious at the emergency exit behind the library. Official diagnosis: severe carbon monoxide poisoning leaking from the old heating system in the basement. They said hallucinations are a common symptom, that the oxygen-starved brain will paint its own nightmares to fill the void. They said the fire was just a small short circuit, burning some boxes of scrap paper in storage. There was no Holloway bequest. There was no iron cage. And certainly, no 666 books bound in human skin. The area I described, according to the university map, is just a solid concrete wall. I almost believed them. I wanted to believe them. Until I asked about Mark. The police officer taking the statement looked at me with pity. "It is a tragedy," he said. He had an accident on Route 9 that night. The car lost its brakes and plunged into the quarry. Died instantly. My throat tasted bitter. Mark died at the right time, right place, right way. It wasn't a hallucination. I dropped out the next day. I moved to a shabby apartment in another city, 3 states away from that university. I worked at a noisy coffee shop where there was never silence. I avoided every library, bookstore, or anywhere that smelled of old paper. 6 months passed. I thought I had escaped. But this morning, a package was placed in front of my apartment door. No sender name. No postmark. Inside was a book. It didn't have a red cover. It was wrapped in pitch black leather, cold and smooth like marble. Beside it was a classic fountain pen, with a sharp gold nib, the ink in the reservoir, thick black and smelling of rust. I planned to throw it in the trash. I planned to light it on fire right in the kitchen sink. But my hand wouldn't obey. I sat down at the table, opening the book. All pages were pristine white. No words, no name, no date. And then I heard it. A whisper. Not from outside, but echoing from within my own skull. The voice sounded like tearing paper, the same one I heard in the basement that night. The library cannot be without a keeper. You burn the old one. Now pick up the pen. My right hand reached out automatically, grasping the fountain pen. My fingers cramped, aching, but I couldn't let go. Black ink began to seep from the nib, dripping onto the pristine white paper. The first line wasn't my thought, but my hand wrote it anyway. The 3rd of January 2026. The person reading this story on the screen thinks they are safe. They think this is just fiction, but they don't know that, right now, behind their back. I can't stop. I have to write the next chapter, and I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. But I just wrote your name in this book.